on Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1. Streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
You're listening to The Jan Price Show, and today my guest is award-winning director Abby Epstein, and we're going to be talking about her brand new documentary called Weed the People. Welcome, Abby. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you, Jan.
Great to have you on the show. My first question is, how did you decide to become a documentary filmmaker?
Oh, well, it was very accidental, actually. I was actually directing theater. I was trained as a theater director. And I was directing a play, which was called The Vagina Monologue.
Oh,
Probably
yes.
Heard of it?
Yes, I have. I've seen it, actually.
Yeah. So I was directing The Vagina Monologues, and I was working with the playwright, and we were touring around the country, just seeing this like amazing social movement that had launched with the play. And I just said to her, this needs to be a documentary. I mean, you need to document what's happening in your movement. And so at that time, I'd only directed theater, and so we hired a documentary film director, and then, like, at the last minute, she had to drop out, and they just kind of turned to me and said, well, this was your idea to direct the film. So I just jumped in.
Baptism by fire.
Baptism by fire, and haven't looked back. Exactly.
Totally different than stage directing, I would imagine.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, yeah, switching from actors to real people, definitely quite a switch. But yes.
Do you go back and forth and still do stage, or are you pretty much now doing documentaries?
I used to go back and do some stage. I used to go back and do a play every once in a while. But now I'm mostly doing film.
And then how did you end up partnering? Your partner is Ricky Lake. How did you end up becoming partners?
Well, that also dates back to the Vagina Monologues. So when I was directing the show back in New York in like 2001, I think it was, we had like 3 celebrities rotating in the cast every week. And Ricky was in one of the casts. So she and I became really close friends in New York, and we just bonded, through the rehearsal process and working on the show. And then eventually, it was like a couple of years later, I guess, and I'd already made this documentary about violence against women. And then I was visiting Ricky, who had then moved to LA, and she started telling me about this birth experience she had and how amazing it was and how more people need to know about these options. And she wanted to do a project around it. And I just was like, whoa, okay. I mean, I've directed one documentary. I guess, maybe this is a documentary. And so that's how she and I started on The Business of Being Born.
Tell us a little bit about that documentary, The Business of Being Born.
Sure. So The Business of Being Born is unbelievably, it's actually 10 years old already, which is very hard to believe. Yeah, it's amazing. And it's still going. I mean, it's still really rocking on. It's like so many people. I mean, we still get emails once a week, of people who say, oh my God, your film changed my life and such an incredible film. But, it's funny because at the time it feels like so many things that I've worked on are sort of ahead of the curve. Like even when I was working on Vagina Monologues in B-Day, we were like screaming from the rooftops about violence against women. And now it's all of a sudden, it's the Me Too moment,
right.
It's the Time's Up moment, like now, 15 years later. Sort of the same thing with The Business of Being Born. We decided to make a documentary looking at other options for childbirth because Ricky had this really amazing experience working with midwives, and most women didn't understand really that there were options when you have a baby, and you don't necessarily have to work with a physician. You can work with midwives, and there are different settings to give birth, and there's home birth, and there's birth centers, and there's hospitals, and, but again, at the time, like when we made the movie, this was so not trending. I mean, like our first question after every screening was usually like, what's a doula? and now everybody knows what a doula is, right? I mean, everybody is like, oh, I have a doula, and they're kind of widespread. So now I think, people are more woke to those birth options. But it was really, The Business of Being Born was really a film about, empowering parents to say, hey, bring your child into the world the way that fits your values. And yes, there's medical aspects to this, but this isn't a medical event. This isn't, an ambulance, red light. This is also a sacred event, personal transformation for, a woman becoming a mother or a family becoming parents. And, it's really something that people weren't putting a lot of thought into, and we're just, so it caused a real, revolution in the birth world, that film.
Now, where was that shown? Was that shown all over, or where did it, in the movie theaters, or?
So that film premiered at Tribeca Film Festival, and we sold it at the Tribeca Film Festival, and then we opened nationwide, about 9 months later, and then ultimately it was shown on Netflix.
Oh, wonderful. And it's still on Netflix? Can you still find it there?
I think it's on iTunes, and it's on our website, thebusinessofbeingborn.com.
Now, what led you to become a director in the first place?
I think that I was always, I always had those instincts, and I went to study at Northwestern University for theater, and I just, I think like a lot of people, at first I thought I wanted to be a performer because you don't really understand the directing instinct. So I started, like most people, thinking I wanted to be on stage and a performer. And then during my college years, I got an opportunity to direct a play and just was completely captivated and was completely smitten with the process and was just like, this is it. This sort of coalesces everything that I'm interested in terms of, writing and the arts and moving people and, working from a vision and fulfilling that vision, and it just really clicked with me.
It's a good, and then how did you transition from college actually to, because you directed some amazing plays in New York, Rent, the Vagina Monologues, which you talked about, Hedwig and the Angry Inch. I mean, those are all just amazing plays to begin with. How did you transition and become director of so many wonderful plays?
I think it just, I started really small. I graduated school and started my own theater company. So I had a local theater company in Chicago and just kind of worked my way up, from the bootstraps, right out of school, raising money, producing theater. I had to produce a season with my theater company every year. And then I ended up assisting, in the case of Rent, I ended up doing an assistantship for Michael Greif, the director of Rent. So when that show took off, it was great because he was able to call me and be like, okay, I need you, now we're doing tours. And so I got to come on board and work on Rent for many years, which was incredible. So, it was just really, I think, like anything else, like stepping stones and just a little bit of luck and meeting the right people.
It's all about luck, isn't it? In some ways in this industry, for sure.
Yeah.
It does tend to do that. We're going to be right back after these brief messages. You're listening to The Jan Price Show, all about movies on Power Talk 1460 and 101 FM. Like The Jan Price Show on Facebook to check out what's coming up on The Jan Price Show. And also check out thejanpriceshow.com and listen to past shows you may have missed. The Ozio Theater in downtown Monterey is now open every day, showing independent and foreign films. The Ozio Theater has new concession offerings, including beer, wine, hard cider, and their homemade Lush Slush. You can now schedule private event screenings for community charity events, birthdays, anniversaries, or just a fun gathering of friends. For more information, visit the Ozio Theater online at oziotheater.com.
Tired Tired of looking at your worn wood floors? Mr. Sandless can bring them back to life again. That's right. It's Mr. Sandless, the no sanding solution to beautiful wood floors. Mr. Sandless is clean, efficient, contains no harmful chemicals, and is certified green. Mr. Sandless refinishes all hardwoods, softwoods, engineered flooring, and laminates. Most jobs are completed in one day with no cleanup required ever, with virtually no odor, and is safe for pets and kids. No need to move out or even leave the house. Mr. Sandless is the company that invented Sandless Refinishing and is the largest floor refinishing company in the world. Over 120,000 happy customers, guaranteed adhesion, guaranteed satisfaction, and a 5-year warranty. Call Mr. Sandless today at 831-747-7476. That's 747-7476. Or MrSandless.com. That's MrSandless.com.
On Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1. Streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
We are back, and my guest today is award-winning director Abby Epstein, and we're talking about her brand new documentary, Weed the People. So, Abby, tell me a little bit about you, another documentary that you did, I think an early one, Until the Violence Stops, and that one had Jane Fonda and Salma Hayek and Rosie Perez in it. So tell us a little bit about that, and you're right, it probably is very pertinent then, now as it was then.
Yes. So, Until the Violence Stops was my first film, and that premiered in Sundance Film Festival in 2004. And it grew out of my work on the vagina monologues and looking at the V-Day movement. V-Day is essentially like a movement that grew out of the play where communities all around the world would perform the vagina monologues on Valentine's Day to raise awareness about violence against women. So I went to Africa, Guatemala. I think I went to 14 countries filming the different aspects of violence against women. So whether it was in Bosnia and Croatia and it was post-war violence, or whether it was in Africa, female genital mutilation, or whether it was with Native American women on the Lakota reservation and domestic violence. So we really just looked at the violence itself, and then we also looked at how the performing of this play was really helping these women and these communities heal. And it was a really, really powerful movie. It was my first movie, so it was a little trial by fire, and it ended up being aired on Lifetime in like a special, as a television special on Lifetime, and I think it is probably still on Netflix at this time too, although I'm not sure. But yeah, that's the story with V-Day Until the Violence Stops. And all those famous women were in it, of course, because Jane Fonda and Salma Hayek, and, these were all women who experienced sexual abuse, and they were ready to speak up about it and take part of this movement. So, like I was saying before, it's kind of shocking because when I look back on what we did, we did a whole performance at Madison Square Garden. We sold out Madison Square Garden. We had 80, celebrities on the stage, everybody, standing up and acknowledging, those who'd been victims of sexual violence. And it was almost like no one paid attention, really. You know what I mean? It was just barely created a ripple.
Wow.
But, who knows? Maybe it's built the foundation for what's going on now.
It's amazing because it's 14 years later, and now we're really shining a huge light on that, obviously. And maybe your film had something to do with it in its own way that you don't even know.
True.
So, and you won a Primetime Emmy Award and a Gracie Allen Award for that documentary.
Yeah.
Very exciting. Very exciting.
Yeah.
So, what drew you to this project, Weed the People?
So Weed the People, it's interesting because Ricky and I, it's a little bit out of our wheelhouse. We were mostly doing films about, women's empowerment, and especially women's empowerment about, the reproductive issues. And we have another film that we're in production on called Sweetening the Pill, which is all about the birth control pill and hormonal contraceptives. So, going into the weed world was definitely a little bit of a departure for us. But I think like everything else Ricky and I do, everything we do really stems from personal experience. So we never kind of look at films from the outside like, oh, we have an axe to grind. You know what I mean? Like, let's make a film about this issue and let's shove this down people's throats, or let's go make a movie about, gun control. Like we just don't approach things that way. Everything always sort of comes from like what touches our lives first. So in this case, it actually came from Ricky and her late husband, Christian. They actually were trying to help a very sick little girl who was going through chemo. And they were researching everything to help this little girl and help control some of her tumor growth. And then Christian did all this amazing research about cannabis oil and found that there were all these anti-tumoral properties in cannabis and anti-cancer properties. And he was talking to us about CBD, which, of course, is so trendy now. But 6 years ago when we started this movie, nobody knew what CBD was. So that really kind of started the movie. And then one day Ricky called me and she said, she got very involved in helping this little girl and her mother. And she said, we're getting on a plane. We're flying up to Mendocino and to meet this cannabis physician. And we're going to try to get this little girl on some cannabis oil and see if it helps. And I just said, oh, my God, I think I have to come and bring a camera crew because this sounds like it could turn into a movie. So that's what we did, and we didn't really know where it was going in the beginning. And that little girl ultimately didn't end up in the movie.
I was going to ask you if she did or not.
Yeah, no, she didn't end up in the movie, but she was really like the inspiration point, and she was kind of the gateway into finding out about this world and then finding other children who were using cannabis as medicine and as part of their cancer treatment.
Why didn't she end up in the movie?
This little girl and her mother, they have sort of a complicated situation. She was adopted out of foster care, and she had a single mother who, was a military vet, and I think they were just nervous, They were just nervous about ultimately taking their story public. And I understand,
right.
because there's a lot of stigma around this, and, children's services will still, penalize parents and take children away from them, even though cannabis is legal or the child might be using it legally under a physician's care. It happens all the time that family services, will get involved. And I think it was scary for them, the thought that she could lose, parental rights or, it's a big step.
Yeah,
it's a big step to be in a movie like this.
That
you really
makes sense.
put yourself out there,
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It really does. Is she still okay? Did she survive?
Yeah, as far as we know, yeah.
Oh, good. So then so you went from that and you decided not to use that. How did you end up then deciding to continue to tell the story, and how did you get these children and the families that you do have in the film?
Yeah, well, we were still filming. I mean, even with that little girl, she was like part of the filming. She wasn't like the whole thing, but we were still going to conferences and talking to cannabis experts. And, we were definitely exploring, more than just that one storyline. So in the process of doing this, like one of the children in the movie, Sophie, she came to us because her mother had been a big fan of The Business of Being Born. And when I guess she found out that Sophie had to go into chemotherapy for a brain tumor, she kind of put out, an alert on Facebook. And a doula that we knew, saw it and said, oh, this woman has a baby going in for chemo, and she's looking for some, holistic complementary therapies, and I know you guys are doing some movie about something like that. So would you talk to her? And so it was and then as we got into the movie and we were meeting, the people who made the cannabis oil, then we would meet patients of theirs. Or hear about other patients trying to get, it's a pretty small community, they all sort of find each other.
And how many states were you filming in? How many different places did you have to go to film this?
So we filmed, unfortunately, California is really the only place with legality. you know? So we really filmed like most of the stories in California, and we like intentionally, I'm sorry, I'm giggling because little dog's crawling in my lap. We intentionally like really wanted to, you know, only feature families who were doing everything absolutely legal and families who had their doctors on board. So that's pretty much California. And then we had one family that we found whose little boy had a brain tumor, and they lived in Chicago, and we kind of helped them figure out how to get to California, how to establish residency, how to get a medical marijuana recommendation and get him on the oils. But that was, you know, that was our only family really out of town. And then for the research, we went to Madrid and we went to Israel, because that's really where the crux of the research has been going on.
And that was fascinating, too. So, I mean, tell us a little bit about what was really interesting for me is that the medical community, well, maybe not the medical community, but our government has known about this research for many, many years, for over 80 years. Over the past 80 years, they've suppressed this information that we've known about. Cannabis has been around for, centuries and centuries. And they had proven how much it had helped many people with different kinds of diseases, but certainly cancer. So the going into this, they didn't have a whole lot, because the information has been suppressed. They didn't have a whole lot to even start their research on. So tell us a little bit about that process, because in Israel, it was fascinating in Madrid of what they're doing over there. So talk a little bit about that, if you would, Abby.
Yeah, sure. Well, you know, one of the things that we cover in the film is the history of cannabis prohibition. Most people don't really understand the history. Most people don't realize that cannabis was a widely used medicine, and it was in the pharmacopoeia. It was prescribed regularly, and it was really only in the 30s that it became prohibited for purely political reasons. So basically, it was being used for, it was politically prohibited. There was never any medical reason to prohibit it. There was no danger. Actually, the AMA protested prohibition of cannabis, because they said, look, we're using this as a medicine, and if you take this away, like, we don't really have good alternatives. So that was really the story behind cannabis being prohibited. And because of that, you know, and then Nixon came into office, and Nixon had this great idea to do this drug scheduling. And so for other corrupt political reasons having to do with Nixon, it got scheduled as the Schedule I narcotic. So once a drug is in Schedule I, you can't do research.
Oh, really?
And no, any research that you do then has to go through the National Institute of Drug Abuse. And they basically would only greenlight studies that would show the harms of marijuana. So if you wanted to do a study showing about, you know, how kids lose IQ points, they would greenlight that. If you wanted to do a study showing how it helped cancer patients, no. So, you know, it was really a shame, because, I mean, all the research was blocked in this country. So you find that, you know, in Madrid, they were doing this research for 20 years on cannabis and cancer, and seeing how cannabis was killing cancer in the test tube. You know, for 20 years they've been working on this, and Israel as well. So it's, you know, it's a shame, I think, in the U.S. that they've had this sort of absolutely ridiculous. I mean, if you look at what a Schedule I drug really is, a Schedule I drug is supposed to have no medical value. It's supposed to be highly addictive and dangerous. So if you ask me, you know, cigarettes and alcohol should be Schedule I, you know.
Yeah, and all the opioids.
They have no medicinal benefit. They're addictive, and they can cause death, right? But this, you know, the cannabis plant was just sort of stuck in there. So there's been this terrible research block. So that was one of the really fascinating things about the film, was to go to Israel and to see what they've been doing, and even how they've been incorporating it in their hospitals, and even clinically doing clinical trials for all different kinds of conditions. It's super fascinating.
It's very fascinating. There's no question about it. We're going to be right back after these brief messages. You're listening to The Jan Price Show, all about movies on Power Talk 1460 and 101 FM. Like The Jan Price Show on Facebook to see what's coming up on The Jan Price Show. And check out thejanpriceshow.com to listen to past shows that you may have missed.
The Century Theater at Northridge Mall is newly remodeled with luxury loungers in every auditorium. Oversized plush recliners are electric-powered reclining seats with extendable footrests, cup holders, and snack tables. Guaranteed comfort with all reserved seating. Reserve the best seat in town online at Cinemark.com or download the Cinemark app today. The Century Theater at Northridge Mall is newly remodeled.
On Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1, streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
We are back, and my guest is award-winning director Abby Epstein, and we're talking about her brand new film documentary, Weed the People. Abby, why, if weed is truly saving lives, why doesn't the government want people to access it?
Right. I mean, that's a really good question. And I think it's a huge issue because it's sort of like, why wouldn't you want people to have access to and know about a medicine that can be really helpful? It doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't.
It's almost the opposite. If something is helping people, the government should make it accessible. I mean, the government should make sure people have it instead of preventing them from having it. And, I think that that's one of the things that we're hoping that happens in the film. And I've kind of seen it over and over and over again where it's like, somebody will just whisper something to somebody else and you could save their life, or you could save them from a lifetime of opiate addictions. It's disgusting if you look at what's going on in this country with opiate abuse.
Yes.
And meanwhile, there's all these studies that show that cannabis can be taken in combination with opiates to, reduce the amount of opiates that people need to take. Sometimes people can even get off opiates completely by using cannabis. It's safe, it's non-toxic, but you don't have the billions of dollars of drug company and FDA and big pharma, behind it, pushing it. So, I think it's like the smaller voices like these documentaries and activists. But eventually, I think the world will wake up. It's just, there's so many things going on right now in the world of like, how much are we going to allow ourselves to be poisoned by our environment and poisoned by our food and poisoned, by the drugs that we're taking? And, it's time for people to step up and self-advocate. So I think when people see this film, they're going to be outraged,
right.
And it doesn't make sense. It really doesn't make sense. Why would you give, a 7-year-old a prescription for OxyContin, right?
Yeah,
and,
amazing.
And you can't give them like a little cannabis oil that 2 drops of it might have the same effect, and they would have, no liver damage, no organ damage, no toxicity, no chance of overdosing. It just doesn't make any sense, And I think that, one of the things, like I was doing an interview today with Bonnie Goldstein, one of the doctors in the film, and she said Tylenol is more dangerous than cannabis.
Really?
She said, when I was working in the pediatric ER, I had a teenager who came in, had taken 3 bottles of Tylenol and succeeded in committing suicide. She died of liver damage in the hospital.
Wow.
And, she said, I know that's never going to happen with cannabis. It's physically impossible. You can't overdose on it. It has a much safer drug profile. So, a lot of this stuff is just myth, and that the culture has bought into, this kind of myth of cannabis being this dangerous, substance, which is the farthest thing in the world.
And with the CBD oil, the cannabinoid oil, it doesn't create the psychedelic effects that you would have with the THC. Is that correct?
Exactly, that's correct. So yeah, there's 2, main cannabinoids in the cannabis plant. There's THC and CBD, and THC is what creates the psychoactive effects, and CBD on its own is more of an antioxidant and anti-inflammatory. So really, in the plant, like most of the cannabis that we've been exposed to has been bred to have these very high levels of THC, right? right? Because it's all been bred for the black market. So growers were, altering the plant to be super stony because that's what it was marketed for, to just, get people really, really stoned and be really strong. But naturally, the plant has so many strains, and you want, about between the CBD and the THC. And there's hundreds of other cannabinoids in the plant. There's CBN, CBG. I mean, they're discovering them all the time. They all have medicinal benefits. And, what the scientists feel is that all together they create what's called the entourage effect. So that essentially, going and buying a bottle of just pure distilled CBD oil is not going to give you the benefits that buying a bottle of a whole plant extract is going to give you, because they're going to have all of these compounds from the plant all working together to create what they call this entourage effect.
Talk a little bit about apoptosis. Am I saying it right?
Apoptosis, yeah.
Apoptosis.
So apoptosis is programmed cell death. So it's essentially when, all the cells in your body have kind of a checkpoint. And if something's wrong, it will commit suicide. The cell will commit suicide. So what happens with cancer is that you have all these rogue cells growing, and cancer tricks the immune system so that the immune system can't see that these cells should be committing suicide. So what cannabis does somehow, which they don't really understand, is that when you add these cannabis strains to like a petri dish of cancer cells and regular cells, the cancer cells die and the healthy cells remain totally unaffected.
And
so somehow it gives the cancer cells back this ability to have programmed cell death, which is apoptosis.
And isn't that what chemo was supposed to do too?
No, so what chemo does is the opposite. So chemo is like a scorched earth policy. So chemo just kills all the cells. So it's killing the cancer cells, but it's killing the healthy cells too.
And therefore, that's why people are getting so sick and everything else. But they, I don't know how long ago it was when many states allow you to have marijuana because of the effects of chemo, because it helped a lot with the throwing up and other side effects that you get from chemo.
Yeah, it does.
And so is that now more and more states are doing that. Do you think that we'll see a change with this movement now to allow people to have the CBD oil to help with cancer?
I hope so. I mean, the thing is that people, you actually need pretty high amounts of THC to get to a cancer-fighting dose. So you need the CBD and you need the THC, so it's not just about CBD. And I think that a lot of the media around cannabis, the CNN documentaries and whatnot, have really done a disservice by kind of launching this massive CBD industry and making CBD, the good sibling, and THC the wicked stepchild. But actually, THC is extremely medicinal, and you need to have both of them. And you can't really vilify THC just because it has a psychoactive effect, in high doses. So yes, I mean, my hope would be that people would see this film, and then, as the research grows, because the research is happening, they would start to see that this is not just for palliative symptom control, that this actually can get to the root of cancer. And there are many, many ways that it actually constricts blood vessels, so it stops the blood flow to new tumors. It reduces metastases. I mean, a lot of this is very, very well documented. It just, unfortunately, hasn't integrated into the medical community because physicians are primarily trained that this is a dangerous drug, and they don't really have any training in the endocannabinoid system and how the plant interacts with the body.
And now we will have more of that, I guess, as time goes on.
Yeah.
So in this movie, you followed 7 families. Is that what you?
5 children.
Five children. And how did you choose the children for this movie? I
don't know that we chose the children. I feel like the children sort of came to us.
Okay.
And we would learn about them through this very small network. And again, like I said, we were really looking for families who were under the care of a physician, who were working within, the medical establishment, not families that were like going rogue and, not doing chemo. And so, I think that we just, like with all these films, they all just come to you in different ways. Like one of the families we ended up finding like through Twitter, they had posted something about their child having cancer or wanting to know about cannabis, so it was all sort of like an organic process.
And so, like Sophie, we loved her story, but they tried not to do traditional chemo because she was not even 1 year old when she was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Is that correct?
Right. She was diagnosed at 9 months old.
Amazing.
And they were supposed to start chemo right away, but they wanted to just try the cannabis oil first. And, the doctors had told them that it was okay for them to delay the chemo, and just have a little bit of a wait and see, because those kind of tumors that that Sophie has, the optic pathway glioma, they're very like fickle tumors. So it's hard to tell whether it's, what's going to happen with it. And so they had, in the beginning, yes, tried to delay the chemo, but then ended up doing chemo and cannabis together, which I think was the most effective for her.
And she's doing fine?
She is. She's still in treatment, though. I mean, she's still in treatment, and, the tumor is died in certain areas and then grown in new areas. And, it's a tricky tumor, but she's doing amazing in the sense that she was supposed to have basically lost her vision by now. And she still has retained, like almost all of her vision, which her parents really credit to the cannabis.
That's amazing. And then her mother became a warrior, I guess, a cannabis warrior, I'm going to call her.
Yes, she did.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, she did. So her mother,
Yeah.
Tracy, ended up founding CannaKids, which is now, a big company that's supplying, cannabis oil. And I think she's got partners now, like all over the world. And she's really, growing this brand. And she's sponsoring all kinds of research in Israel and at UCLA. And, yeah, it's really, become her life.
Yes, it's amazing how, it's a tragedy like the one she and her husband have experienced with Sophie, and how it's grown into now a passion project and helping others. I think that's really amazing when you can take something that can could on the surface appear very negative, and you turn it into an incredible positive. But there was a little tension in the movie between the, Aunt Zelda?
Yes, Mara from Aunt Zelda.
Yeah, talk a little bit about Aunt Zelda and what she and her husband do and what that organization does for our listeners.
Yeah, so Mara Gordon is someone we had found early on, and she and her husband Stuart founded this company called Aunt Zelda's Oil, and basically Mara herself, had turned to the oil for her own health problems. She had a terribly botched spine surgery and ended up on all sorts of terrible narcotics, and she lost her quality of life completely. And so out of desperation, she started making cannabis edibles to treat herself. And she was really so amazed that they gave her life back and got her off all these other drugs that she started Aunt Zelda's Oil. And in the beginning, it was just Mara and her husband, Stuart. And they were just making oil in their kitchen in Northern California and just helping people, like not charging $1 over the cost of the actual product, just making this oil and just trying to get it out and help people and collect their data and learn from them. So, I think the thing is when you film over 6 years, so much changes and grows, and I think Aunt Zelda's oil, has really grown, and now, she has Zelda Therapeutics, and they do business out of Australia, and they're a publicly traded company, and another company called the Oil Plant, and she's got business partners, and, she's really more almost trying to act more like a big pharmaceutical company and get clinical trials going and get some data. So, she's had incredible growth just in the 5 years since we started making this movie. It's amazing.
Amazing. And, what wonderful pioneers, again, to be doing this. So we'll be right back after these brief messages. You're listening to The Jan Price Show, all about movies on Power Talk 1460 and 101 FM. Like The Jan Price Show on Facebook to check out what's coming up on The Jan Price Show. And also check out thejanpriceshow.com to listen to shows you may have missed. The Ozio Theater in downtown Monterey is now open every day, showing independent and foreign films. The Ozio Theater has new concession offerings, including beer, wine, hard cider, and their homemade Lush Slush. You can now schedule private event screenings for community charity events, birthdays, anniversaries, or just a fun gathering of friends. For more information, visit the Ozio Theater online at oziotheater.com.
Tired of looking at your worn wood floors? Mr. Sandless can bring them back to life again. That's right. It's Mr. Sandless, the no sanding solution to beautiful wood floors. Mr. Sandless is clean, efficient, contains no harmful chemicals, and is certified green. Mr. Sandless refinishes all hardwoods, softwoods, engineered flooring, and laminates. Most jobs are completed in one day with no cleanup required ever, with virtually no odor, and is safe for pets and kids. No need to move out or even leave the house. Mr. Sandless is the company that invented Sandless Refinishing and is the largest floor refinishing company in the world. Over 120,000 happy customers, guaranteed adhesion, guaranteed satisfaction, and a 5-year warranty. Call Mr. Sandless today at 831-747-7476. That's 747-7476. Or MrSandless.com. That's MrSandless.com.
On Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1. Streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
We are back, and my guest today is award-winning director Abby Epstein, and we are talking about her new movie, Weed the People. Abby, you followed 5 children in this film. Do you want to talk a little bit about the couple from Chicago and their son?
Sure. So the Peterson family were living in Chicago, and their son was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and he had to undergo emergency radiation at the hospital. He was 6 years old, and then ultimately, they had nothing else to do for him because of where the tumor was located in the brainstem. It was a DIPG tumor. There was no way to even do chemo because chemo doesn't even penetrate the brainstem. So they really left this poor family with nothing else to do, almost sent them home to die with their kid.
Yeah.
And so it was really wonderful that we were able to connect with them, and they were able to come from Chicago to LA, meet with Dr. Bonnie Goldstein, get a recommendation, get oils for their son, AJ, which were incredibly helpful to him. But I think it was also very stressful for them, in the film because they had to go back to Chicago, and then they didn't have any access to the oils anymore and were dependent on other people shipping them oils from California illegally. And it's awful. It's awful. It just goes back to what makes this a human rights issue. How can you have a child with a terminal brain tumor that, is being denied the one medicine that's giving him any relief?
Yeah.
It's really unconscionable.
I totally agree. And you see him change, too, the pictures. Didn't Aunt Zelda, didn't Mara and Stuart worked with him? Right?
Yes,
yes, okay.
Exactly. Aunt Zelda's got medicine for him, and he's was a tough case.
Right.
So, but I think the parents were just the Petersons were, they were really grateful that they were able to do anything for him. And I think to have a diagnosis like that and feel like there's anything you could do for your child, anything, parents need to feel that way.
Oh, yes.
So, yeah, they're a very, very special family.
Yeah, they really were. And again, you saw the change in their son, before he started the cannabis oil and then during that process, and how his face changed and everything. And he became active and playful and everything.
Yep.
Unfortunately, that it's sad that, there wasn't really much more they could do for him, but they were a wonderful couple. They really, truly were. What were your biggest obstacles in putting together this movie?
Funding.
Yes, that's always a problem. Did you find it more difficult because of the subject matter?
I would say yes. Yes. I mean, the weird thing about doing something about cannabis is that you feel like, everybody's so woke to this. Everybody knows that cannabis is medicine. And ultimately, it's like you still face all these weird obstacles, like we just had all our Facebook ads pulled and had to, fight with Facebook.
Oh, really?
Of course, yeah, because, we had the word weed in the title page of the film. So that's the problem, It's like you're dealing with this substance and it's legal, but it's not. It's a Schedule I narcotic. And, there were other things where we couldn't apply for certain grants, because they're publicly funded or they're federally funded and they can't have anything to do with the plant. So, there's still these ridiculous restrictions around it that make it very challenging. And not to mention, trying to film in hospitals. I mean, filming in hospitals is already really tough to get access. And then what would happen to us is we would get access and, the doctors would be so wonderful and supportive and want to speak to us on camera. And then once the hospitals would get word that the child was using cannabis, they would, block us from coming back. And I don't really understand because the oncologists were fully supportive. You could see the child was doing well. It's good press for the hospital. Look, this child is surviving this incredible cancer and thriving, but they just panic and close the door on us. So I think at every turn, there's obstacles when you're doing anything that deals with cannabis.
What happened when that happened? I mean, when you went and they decided to block you, and you've got your film crew there and you're ready to move forward.
Yeah,
what did you end up doing?
No, I mean, we never got to the point of showing up. The press person at the hospital would just say, oh, no, I'm sorry, we can't have your film crew again. So, with every kid, we would usually get in for, 1 point, except for with UCLA. UCLA is incredibly open. They let us film all the time. They, let Chico, the patient, have cannabis oil in his hospital room and put directly in his G-tube. They're the ones who are just 18 months into cannabis clinical trials. So UCLA was a different story, but all the other hospitals, we would kind of get in once, and then when we would call to film there again, they would be like, oh, no, we can't. So, it's frustrating because the doctors were so impressed by what they were seeing, and they were more than willing to speak on camera, but the hospitals wouldn't let them.
That's unbelievable, isn't it? It's just unbelievable, especially in California, since it is legal in California and has been, medical marijuana has been legal for a long time. What do you think about Canada now, just allowing recreational marijuana, but certainly medical? So what are your thoughts about that?
I think Canada's so smart. They're so smart. And I think the United States is going to be looking back, in 10 years going, oh, my God, why didn't we do what Canada did? I mean, aside from just, banking the entire industry, I think it's super smart. And, I think it's going to be a great service for public health in Canada. Because, prohibition doesn't work. It's never worked.
No, it hasn't.
All it's done is put communities of color in jail. That's really all it's done.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that at this point, how ridiculous is it that you have all these communities of color and people of color sitting in jail or with criminal records, And then you have all these white people becoming billionaires and investing millions of dollars in cannabis industry.
Yes.
It's absurd.
Yeah.
You know, so the way the United States is like we're sort of in this weird legal limbo where it's kind of legal, but it's not. But, you know, certain people go to jail for it still, but certain people don't. And, you know, I think that Canada is like really smart. It's really forward thinking. And I have a feeling that's probably where most countries are going to end up going in the future.
I agree. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to The Jan Price Show, all about movies on Power Talk 1460 and 101 FM. Like The Jan Price Show on Facebook and check out thejanpriceshow.com.
The Century Theater at Northridge Mall is newly remodeled with luxury loungers in every auditorium. Oversized plush recliners are electric-powered reclining seats with extendable footrests, cup holders, and snack tables. Guaranteed comfort with all reserved seating. Reserve the best seat in town online at Cinemark.com or download the Cinemark app today. The Century Theater at Northridge Mall is newly remodeled.
On Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1, streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
We are back, and my guest today is award-winning director Abby Epstein, and we're talking about her brand new documentary called Weed the People. Abby, do you think it will take a big pharma company, and maybe they're already doing this, to decide that they want to, start to market cannabis, and maybe that will make the changes?
I think there's a role for pharma, and I think pharma has been involved. And there's a company called GW Pharmaceuticals that put the first cannabis-based epilepsy drug on the market that was FDA approved. And GW Pharmaceuticals, is running some clinical trials, and I think that there's a place for pharma in this, and I hope that pharma gets involved to a certain extent, because that's the only way that this medicine is going to be covered, because this medicine right now is completely unaffordable, and everybody has to pay out of pocket. So it's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. Yeah, go ahead. I agree.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, so I do think that there's a role for pharmaceutical companies, but, maybe some of these cannabis companies are also trying to act like pharmaceutical companies, in making their products, running their own clinical trials. They're not going to have billions and millions of dollars, go through FDA trials. So, I don't know how that's going to work. But ultimately, I think the problem is, somebody right now who's got stage 4 cancer, they don't have 17 years to wait until this, runs through the system of drug companies and manufacturing, patented drug formulations from the cannabis plant. They just don't have time. So as long as the profile is so safe, people are just going to want to do it. They're just going to want to try it.
What do you hope people get out of this movie?
For me, I think the movie is a very hopeful movie. I think it's a movie that we need right now with sort of everything that's going on in the world, and we've so much contention in this country. It's a dark moment. It's a difficult moment, and I think this movie is about hope and family and caring and communities coming together to heal in unexpected ways. And I think people are less sense of, real triumph, that these are families who, tried something outside of the system. Many of them had incredible results, absolutely miraculous results.
They did.
And it's very uplifting. So, I hope that people see this and spread the word among other people that are suffering with pain or opiate addiction or cancer or, all of there's so many conditions that I think this medicine is applicable for. So, I hope it opens people's minds and they start investigating whether this is something that might help their own quality of life and shatters their preconceived, notions about this being this addictive drug.
Well, thank you for making this movie. I think it's something that everybody should see. I definitely do. It's going to be out in theaters, and thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate you being on the show, and you're so knowledgeable about this. It's so great to talk to you.
Thank you, Jan. Do I need to? Do people know where to go to get tickets?
Why don't you
see the movie?
Yeah, why don't you tell us?
Because there's a lot of important information.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a lot of screenings happening over the next 6 weeks from East Coast, West Coast, Midwest. So if you go to our website, which is called weedthepeoplemovie.com, so if you go to weedthepeoplemovie.com, you can click to see a full list of where all the screenings are and where you can see it. And if it's not coming to where you live, then you can actually host your own screening. You can host a live screening, or you can host even a virtual online screening. So there's all different opportunities to support the film, see the film, host screenings, download our social media kit, and sort of share about the screening. So yeah, we've got all the tools out there for
Great. And everybody, please search this movie out, especially if you know somebody who's suffering from cancer. And I think everybody knows somebody who's suffering from cancer. So again, Thank you, Abby. You take care. Have a great day. Thank you.
You too.
You've been listening to The Jan Price Show, all about movies on Power Talk 1460 and 101 FM. Like The Jan Price Show on Facebook and check out thejanpriceshow.com.